Hey everyone, welcome to our last video about macromolecules. You'll remember that macromolecules are giant molecules made up of the elements carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, and that carbon is the most important one. You might also remember that when we talk about macromolecules, we talk about their functions, but we also talk about their monomers, which are the small units that bond together to make their polymers. And this time we're going to be talking about the functions, monomers, and polymers of proteins. So proteins come in a lot of our different foods. You can see there are some representations like meat, chicken, steak, fish. Cheeses have a lot of proteins, nuts, and also things like beans and quinoa, eggs. So a lot of different foods do contain a high amount of proteins. And if you are working out to try to kind of gain muscle, if you're doing a sport, you might be trying to eat a lot of these foods that are high in proteins. So, what do proteins really do? Why do we need them? Well, they have a lot of different functions. I mean, honestly, of all the macromolecules that we've looked at, proteins have the most functions, but let's go through them. Well, they have some structure ones. So, a certain protein called keratin, for example, makes up your hair, skin, and nails. We also have functional ones that do a specific job, and one of those is called hemoglobin. You'll notice they both have ended in IN. Kind of interesting, right? But hemoglobin is in your blood cells, and its job is to carry oxygen for your blood cells. There are also movement. Muscles need to be able to move. And so you have these proteins in your muscles called actin and myosin, and they help your muscles expand and contract and help you to be able to move. There's defense proteins like antibodies, various different types of antibodies. They help defend your body against bacterial infections and sometimes even viral infections. There's also ones that help with your cell functions and control the speed of reactions. And those are called enzymes. We're going to talk a little bit extra about enzymes, and we're actually going to have an entire module about enzymes because that's how important these special proteins are. So, what makes up proteins? Well, they have a monomer called an amino acid, and there are actually 20 different kinds of amino acids. These amino acids have different parts, kind of like our nucleic acids had different parts for their monomers, but so do amino acids. So, the protein monomer or amino acid has a carboxyl group, which is a C carbon bonded to oxygen, oxygen, and hydrogen. It also has an R group, which we're going to look at in just a second, but that R group really gives each amino acid its own identity. And then it also has an amino group, or a nitrogen with two hydrogens is called an amino group in organic chemistry. So amino acids are made up of a couple different parts, and let's take a look more in depth at those R groups. So here are all 20 of the amino acids that exist in living things on planet Earth. And like I said, there are these different R groups that are basically just different chemical structures, and they are unique, and they give each amino acid its unique properties and its unique characteristics. If you look on this chart, you can see the R groups are actually highlighted in yellow, green, blue, or purple, and you don't have to know much about their charge or whether they're polar at this point in time. If you were to study biology more or chemistry more in college, you might have to know that information. But just know that the R groups are different for the different amino acids, and that's what gives them each their identity. Next, let's talk about the polymers. So once we get a bunch of these amino acids binded together with each other, we ended up with polymers. And polymers for a protein would just be called a folded protein. And basically what happens is a bunch of bonds occur between different amino acids, and those bonds have a special name. They're peptide bonds. So another way or another word for folded proteins you could say is a polypeptide. So poly, like polymer, means many, and peptide is going to represent proteins. There are 4 different levels of organization within folding up a protein. So first you can have just like a chain of amino acids bonded to each other. Then that chain can twist and fold because of some different kind of reactions or interactions between the molecules, kind of like how water could be attracted to water through hydrogen bonding. Then the chain of amino acids can fold up, and then sometimes multiple chains even come together to make a full folded protein. And some of those things that help create the shape, like I said, are interactions between the molecules, like hydrogen bonding and van der Waals forces, which we talked about with properties of water. Here's a picture of a folded protein, but let's get a little more in depth with this. Like I said, there are 4 stages of folding up proteins, and here's a little bit more visual representation. You can have just a chain of amino acids, and then it can fold together because of hydrogen bonds and things like van der Waals forces, and they can either form into the shape called a pleated sheet or a beta pleated sheet or an alpha helix. Sometimes then those folded parts will even fold in on each other. And you can see the pleated sheets and the alpha helix within this tertiary protein structure where it's starting to fold together. And when you get 2 of those folded parts together, bonded to each other, you're going to end up with what we call a quaternary protein structure, but that's just a full folded protein. All right, next up, we want to talk about this very, very special protein that is called enzymes. And like I said, I'm going to talk about it a little bit now, but we're actually going to spend a whole module talking about enzymes because that's how important they are. Well, enzymes are really important because they control when reactions start, stop, speed up, or slow down. And a lot of times we call them a biological catalyst. And a catalyst is just something that makes it easier for reactions to occur, or in other words, speeds up the reactions. So enzymes are able to do that because they will take 2 substances. Like let's say we wanted to break this maltose up into 2 glucose molecules. It's going to come over to the enzyme to what we call the active site, and that's going to break it up into those 2 glucose molecules. So this is what we would call a decomposition reaction because we had something and then it gets broken up. Sometimes you do have 2 molecules that want to bond together, and an enzyme will help make that happen pretty fast. So thanks so much for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed learning about all of the macromolecules.